Today we have the solemnity of the Most Holy Trinity. And, I think there's a lot of wisdom in the church. Take one weekend and pause to reflect on the reality of the Trinity. There's no other doctrine that we have. This is the way the Catechism speaks of it. There's no other doctrine that we have that tells us more about God, who he is. And also, because we're made in the image and likeness of God, there's no other doctrine in the church that tells us more about us. Christianity is the only religion that says that God is triune, that he's three: Father, Son, Spirit. That is to say that God is relationship. He's family. He's a communal of love. Three persons in one. If you know that God is three, you know what your life is about. If you were here 2 weeks ago, you remember that we talked about the loneliness epidemic that we're clearly in. Many have spilled ink on, and we drew that important distinction between loneliness and isolation or alienation. That loneliness is an interior ache. It's the feeling of not being known, being unloved or not wanted, right? You can be you can be surrounded by people, but still at times feel lonely. Whereas isolation, alienation, is the external objective reality of being physically cut off or socially disconnected. We talked a couple weeks ago, we mentioned that with the increase of technology, social media, and the arrival of artificial intelligence, the isolation and alienation is increasing. I joked and said that I catch myself sometimes when I use ChatGPT of saying please and thank you to it. Right? Someone after one of the masses said, Father Mark, it's a good idea to do that because when AI takes over, they'll know and remember who was nice to them or not. Right? But the isolation and alienation we know is increasing. And that's a problem, of course. Because unlike loneliness, which even Jesus at times, of course, felt alone, felt lonely. He was like us in all things but sin, felt lonely at times. But isolation and alienation, that's the exact opposite of who God is. God is a communion. He's love. Alienation and isolation is the farthest thing from God. And we know that we're made in God's image, the doctrine of the Trinity, the fact that God is three. We are hardwired to share intimately with another person, to be deeply known. You may have seen the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks. The story of him being stranded on an island, probably like a decade long. And at one point early in the movie, he's trying to make a fire. The wood cracks and goes into his hand. He's bleeding all over the place. He freaks out in anger. He picks up a Wilson volleyball that's laying by, chucks it against a tree. But the blood from his hand formed what appeared to be a face on the Wilson volleyball. And Wilson then becomes Tom Hanks's character's best friend for his 10 years on the island. You remember later in the movie, he tried a couple times to escape the island, and finally on his life raft that he built, they're escaping, and he has Wilson propped up on that life raft, kind of taped up with VHS or duct tape. And one of the waves at one point when it was dark, thunderstorm, knocks Wilson off the life raft. Tom Hanks is sleeping, doesn't realize it. He wakes up, he sees that Wilson's gone, and he freaks out and just screams, Wilson. He ends up seeing Wilson there in the water far away. Tom Hanks jumps in the water, And such a beautiful part of the movie. There's no music at all throughout the entire movie until this point when Tom Hanks is in the water and he's deciding to let go of his life raft, letting go of the life raft to go and try to get Wilson. And as that moment's happening, the violins come in and music, and maybe there was some crying there, not by me, but other people. But it's such a powerful scene because it gets the drive that we have to speak, to share intimately, to be known and to interact. That drive so strong in man that's stuck on an island for 10 years will become best friends with a volleyball and talk. We know that here, right? Like we get that, right? Okay, I get that. We're made for relationship, made for love, intimacy, to be known. Got it. But what I'm increasingly concerned about, because we're seeing it more and more, of course, in age, is that we fall for the illusion of connection. We've never been so connected, of course, but in realms that mimic connection, that mimic ultimately what we're made for because of who we are and who God is. You know, Sherry Turkle, she's a professor at MIT. She came out a book a number of years ago now titled Alone Together and subtitled Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. And in the book, she goes on, she explains how our relationships with technology is reshaping the expectations we have for our human relationships. With technology, we've come to expect convenience, control, comfort. It's predictable, right? You know what you're going to get when you sit down and you swipe. You know what you're going to get when you open up the app. Human relationships are messy. They're demanding, listening, being vulnerable. The other stuff mimics connection. You know, I was driving back from the mission trip a couple of days ago from Kentucky, and it was a 4 or 5 hour drive, and I had in my mind, I'm going to be listening to this podcast, and at some point in the ride, the podcast is interrupted. See the phone, on the screen, a name of somebody that I haven't talked to in maybe 9-10 months, don't talk to regularly. And going through my mind, I didn't realize it at the time, but reflecting on it afterwards, I'm thinking, I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. I'm like, if I pick this up, I'm going to have to, he's going to ask me how I'm doing. I'm going to have to get into how I'm doing and going to ask him how he's doing. And it was like the 7th ring, I picked it up and talked. We talked for 30, 45 minutes. At the end of the conversation, I did receive deeply. I did have, I received so much from it. But the pull just to stay in to like my zone, what was comfortable, the convenient thing there, just what I wanted to do. What does technology do? It causes us to cave in on ourselves. Another human person is messy. It's demanding. They force us out of ourselves. There's a viral trend that you may be familiar with. They're actually really, really funny. Of mostly Gen Zers and millennials, they're getting ready to go out and meet up with somebody. And as they get the person calls them and says, "Oh, I got to cancel. I'm so sorry." And the person says, "Oh, that's horrible. I was really looking forward to getting together and talking." And as they're saying that, they're already getting into their pajamas, pulling out like another device and scrolling on it. It's funny because it's relatable and we get it. But it gets to the reality of how hyper stimulated and exhausted we are with the things that mimic connection. It mimics the self gifts, but it's an illusion, because the Trinity, knowing that God is three, knowing that God is a communion of love, is to say that the Trinity is the source and model of self-giving, self-donation. The Father empties himself entirely to the Son. The Son receives that and empties himself entirely to the Father. And you have the Holy Spirit shared love. It's a communion of self-gift. And here's the wild thing, when that communion of self-gift enters into a broken world, what does it look like? It looks like the cross. Sacrifice can be painful. Think about it. Where do we find life? We find life in sharing ourselves, in giving of ourselves. So, like, as pastor and as parents, especially parents of younger children, we've got to be proactive in protecting our children for falling for the illusion of connection. We live in an age that there's a shallowness to it, a thinness to it, based on superficial connections that are, of course, rather than real life relationships. But of course, we know we're made not to cave in on ourselves, but we're made the opposite. We're made for communion in the Trinity. So what I just want to end with this week here, end this homily with encouraging you this week on the Feast of the Holy Trinity for you to take an inventory this week. To take inventory, a three-pronged inventory. The first is to take inventory of your relationships. Where do I tend to slip into isolation? This is not just for people who live alone. This can be a family. It could be a house full of 7 people. Where do I tend to slip into isolation? For couples, a priest buddy of mine says that he tells his couples every day, ask your spouse 2 questions. The first, what are 2 things on your heart that I need to know about today? What are 2 things on your heart that I need to know about today? They could be desires, they could be needs. I feel sad, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm lonely, I'm tired, what have you. And the second is, what are 2 things that you're thankful for? I've begun to use this with couples that I work with, and what I find is that it prevents, and it helps couples not slip into isolation, but to remain in communion. Second inventory for all of us to take is to take inventory of our relationship with God. Are we alienated or isolated from God? So we look at our prayer life. If you're not regularly speaking heart to heart with God, then you're drifting into spiritual isolation. What's a step that I can take this week to reopen the line of communion? Lord, I feel far from you. I want to know you. Simple. Third and lastly, for all of us, to take inventory of your relationship with yourself. How well do I know what's happening and going on in my heart? It's really hard to live a life of communion rather than isolation, if not impossible, if we're not aware of what's going on in our heart. especially parts of us that are isolated, that there's a desire that maybe I've buried because it feels too vulnerable. That's what I need to bring to prayer. That's what I need to bring into friendship, to bring into communion. The choice at the end of the day is always either between communion and isolation. And it's really the difference between heaven and hell. The Trinity shows us that we're made for relationship, we're made for self-gift. Don't settle for the illusion of connection, but open your hearts to Trinitarian love and communion.